The massive space station called Kepler Academy floated in the darkness between 3 stars. Ships from 12 different alien worlds docked at its ports every day. Inside the station, the best and brightest students from across the galaxy learned how to fight wars and keep peace. Commander Zethkar stood at the observation deck watching new students arrive. His crystalline body sparkled as light passed through him. He had run this academy for 50 years and had never seen anything like what was coming today. 5 ships approached from a yellow star system at the edge of known space. The planet these beings came from was marked as a Class 9 Deathworld in all the records. Most professors thought it was a mistake to invite creatures from such a dangerous place. The world had weather that could kill, animals that hunted thinking beings, and diseases that spread through the air. How could anything smart enough for military school survive in such a horrible place? Jake Martinez stepped off the first transport ship and looked around the docking bay. Everything was much bigger than he expected. The ceiling stretched up so high he could barely see it. Strange beings moved around him, speaking in sounds he had never heard before. Some looked like living water, others glowed with inner light, and a few seemed to be made of metal and circuits. He checked his translator device and waited for his team. Katie Brooks came next, followed by Ryan Cole, Lisa Grant, and Alex Turner. They all wore the same gray uniforms that marked them as new students. The other alien beings stared at them with curiosity and sometimes fear. The humans looked around with wide eyes, but tried to stay calm. They had trained for this moment for 2 years back on Earth. A tall being made of blue crystal approached them. His voice came through their translators in perfect English. "I am Commander Zethkar. You are the humans from the Deathworld Terra. Follow me to orientation." He turned and walked toward a long hallway without waiting for an answer. The orientation hall held 300 students from all the different alien species. The humans sat together in the back row and watched as each group was introduced. The Etherians looked like beings made of pure light that could change shape at will. The Nexari appeared to be living computers with bodies made of silver metal. The Veltar moved as one group because they shared a group mind that connected all their thoughts. The Hydros came from water worlds and wore special suits filled with liquid. Many other species filled the remaining seats. Professor Quintal of the Nexari stood at the front of the room. Her metal face showed no emotion as she spoke. "Each of you represents the finest military minds your species can produce. You will spend the next year learning advanced warfare tactics, strategic planning, and diplomatic solutions to conflict. Most of you will return home as officers in your planetary defense forces. Some may join the Galactic Fleet." She paused and looked directly at the humans. "We have made an exception this year by accepting students from a Class 9 Deathworld. We will observe their progress with great interest." Several alien students turned to stare at the humans again. The first week of classes proved difficult for Jake and his team. Mathematics that other species learned as children seemed impossible to the humans. Stellar navigation required understanding of space physics that Earth schools never taught. Ryan Cole struggled with quantum mechanics, while Lisa Grant could not grasp faster-than-light communication theory. The alien students whispered among themselves that the Deathworlders could not keep up with basic concepts. Katie Brooks tried her best in diplomatic strategy class, but found the alien approaches strange. Every solution involved long discussions, careful compromise, and making sure no one got hurt. When the professor asked how to handle a trade dispute between 2 planets, Katie suggested sending a small military force to make both sides negotiate faster. The entire class went silent and stared at her. Alex Turner had similar problems in theoretical warfare studies. The textbooks described conflicts as chess games where each side tried to win with the smallest possible cost. Everything focused. on minimal casualties, preserved infrastructure, and quick, peaceful solutions. When Alex read about historical galactic conflicts, he noticed that most wars lasted for years, while both sides tried to avoid actually fighting. 3 weeks into the program, the Academy began practical exercises. A first simulation placed. Teens in a space station, where terrorists held civilian hostages. The alien teams formed careful plans that involved hours of preparation, detailed analysis of the station layout, and coordination with multiple agencies. They calculated optimal approach routes, studied terrorist psychology, and prepared for every possible outcome. Now Jake gathered his human team in their planning room and looked at the station blueprint for 5 minutes. Katie, you and Ryan enter through the maintenance shafts here and here. Lisa, you take the main corridor and make noise to draw their attention. Alex and I will come through the docking bay once they move to investigate. Questions? His team nodded, and they moved toward the simulation chamber. The exercise began with all teams entering the station at the same time. Alien groups moved slowly and carefully, checking each corridor and maintaining constant communication with their command centers. They followed established protocols and made sure to verify every piece of information before taking action. The human team moved fast. Katie and Ryan crawled through spaces that the aliens considered too small and dangerous to use. Lisa walked straight down the main hallway, making enough noise to wake the dead. When the terrorists moved to investigate, Alex and Jake burst through the docking bay and ran toward the hostage location. 12 minutes after the simulation started, Jake's team had freed all hostages and captured every terrorist. The alien teams were still setting up their equipment and requesting additional intelligence reports. Professor Veloff stared at the results display in confusion. According to every mathematical model, the human approach should have resulted in multiple casualties and mission failure. Commander Zethkar reviewed the simulation recordings 3 times before he believed what he saw. The humans had ignored every safety protocol, violated standard operating procedures, and achieved perfect results through methods that made no logical sense. They treated the dangerous situation like a simple problem that needed a fast solution. Alien students began asking questions about human tactics, but found the answers confusing. When they asked Jake why he chose such a risky approach, he shrugged and said it seemed like the obvious thing to do. Katie explained that sometimes speed mattered more than perfect information. Ryan mentioned that on Earth, waiting too long often meant everyone died. Word spread quickly through the Academy that the Deathworlders had completed an advanced simulation in record time using methods that should not have worked. Some professors demanded an investigation, while others wanted to study human decision-making processes. The alien students looked at their new classmates with a mixture of respect and fear. Jake and his team returned to their quarters that night, knowing that everything had changed. They were no longer just strange beings from a dangerous world. They were something new and potentially dangerous in a galaxy that had forgotten how to fight real wars. The Academy training moved into more complex scenarios during the second month. Commander Zethkar watched from the control room as teams prepared for the planetary defense simulation. This exercise had been used for 20 years to test advanced tactical thinking. Most alien teams followed the same basic approach because it worked well and minimized casualties. The simulation showed a peaceful colony world with 50 million inhabitants facing invasion by an enemy force 3 times larger than the defenders. Historical records showed that successful defense required establishing layered defensive positions, evacuating civilians to safe zones, and requesting reinforcement from nearby systems. The average completion time was 18 hours with acceptable casualty rates below 15%. Jake Martinez stood with his team reviewing the tactical display. Dozens of cities dotted the planet's surface connected by transportation networks, and communication systems. The enemy fleet would arrive in 6 hours with enough firepower to destroy any fixed defensive position. Standard doctrine called for spreading, defending forces across multiple strong points to slow the advance. Ryan, Cole pointed at the outer colonies near the landing zones. Why are we defending these places? They are too far from our main base and too close to where the enemy will land. The other human team members gathered around the display to hear his idea. Katie Brooks looked at the population distribution. Charts, Ryan is right. If we try to hold everything, we will be too weak everywhere. What if we let them take the outer areas and pull everyone back to the central region? She traced a defensive line across the map that abandoned nearly half. The planet. Lisa Grant nodded slowly. The civilians in those areas could slow down the enemy advance if we evacuate them properly. Make the enemy deal with refugee columns and supply problems while we prepare our real defense. Her suggestion made sense to the other humans, but would horrify most alien commanders. Alex Turner studied the enemy approach routes. They will expect us to defend the obvious targets. What if we hit their landing zones while they are still unloading? Catch them when they are most vulnerable instead of waiting for them to organize. His plan required abandoning safe defensive positions to launch risky attacks. The alien teams in nearby planning rooms worked through detailed calculations. The Nexari team ran probability assessments on 14 different defensive configurations. The Etherian students consulted historical databases for similar scenarios. The Veltar collective mind processed thousands of tactical options simultaneously. Every alien approach focused on minimizing risk and preserving resources. When the simulation began, alien forces deployed according to established military doctrine. They spread their units across multiple defensive lines, established supply, depots in secure locations, and prepared fallback positions in case of retreat. Communication networks connected all units to Central Command for coordinated response. Everything followed the textbook exactly. The human team implemented their controversial strategy immediately. Ryan Cole coordinated the evacuation of outer colonies while Katie Brooks organized refugee movement toward enemy landing zones. Instead of moving civilians away from danger, she directed them along routes that would intersect with advancing enemy forces. The simulation controllers watched in amazement as millions of refugees clogged enemy supply lines. Invading forces found themselves responsible for displaced populations they had never planned to encounter. Military vehicles designed for fast movement crawled through crowds of evacuees. Enemy commanders struggled to maintain advance schedules while dealing with humanitarian crisis. Meanwhile, Alex Turner led assault forces against enemy landing sites. Instead of waiting for invaders to establish strong positions, he attacked during the vulnerable unloading phase. His forces hit 3 different locations simultaneously using weapons and tactics designed for desperate situations rather than careful military operations. Lisa Grant commanded the central defensive zone, using methods that violated basic safety protocols. She placed defensive positions in locations that offered superior firepower at the cost of retreat options. Her units had orders to hold ground regardless of casualties, something that horrified alien observers who prioritized soldier survival. Jake Martinez coordinated the overall strategy from a command post that moved every 30 minutes. Traditional military thinking required stable communication centers with multiple backup systems. Jake used mobile command units that enemy forces could never target effectively because they never stayed in the same place long enough. 6 hours into the simulation, the alien teams maintained their defensive lines but faced steady pressure from superior enemy forces. Their careful resource management preserved most of their capabilities, but the mathematical reality suggested eventual defeat. They followed proper procedures and made logical decisions based on available information. The human strategy produced chaos that somehow worked in their favor. Enemy forces controlled large areas of the planet, but faced constant harassment from civilian refugees, supply line attacks, and unpredictable defensive positions. Their numerical advantage meant nothing when they could not concentrate forces effectively. Professor Veloff monitored the simulation results with growing confusion. According to every tactical model in the Academy database, human methods should have resulted in complete failure within 3 hours. Instead, the Deathworlders had turned a defensive scenario into an offensive operation that kept enemy forces off balance and reactive. 12 hours into the exercise, something unprecedented happened. The human team launched a coordinated counterattack that recaptured 2 major cities, while enemy forces were still trying to establish control over their initial objectives. Jake's mobile command structure allowed faster communication than the alien teams achieved with their sophisticated equipment. Ryan Cole's refugee strategy proved particularly effective when evacuees began providing intelligence about enemy movements and sabotaging equipment left behind during hasty advances. Katie Brooks had turned millions of displaced civilians into an irregular intelligence network that covered the entire planet. The simulation ended after 14 hours with human forces, controlling more territory than they had started with. Enemy casualties exceeded defender losses by a ratio of 4-to-1. Most importantly, the human team had achieved objectives that the simulation designers had considered mathematically impossible. Commander Zethkar called an immediate meeting with all Academy instructors. The human performance had broken fundamental assumptions about military science that had guided galactic warfare for thousands of years. Their methods violated basic principles of civilized conflict resolution while achieving superior results. Professor Quintal of the Nexari requested access to human historical military records. What she discovered kept her awake for 3 days straight. Earth history contained conflicts of a scale and intensity that other species had never experienced. Humans had fought wars where entire populations participated and casualties reached numbers that seemed impossible. The Etherin student Luxara approached Katie Brooks after the simulation ended. Your species has fought wars where millions died. How do you make decisions knowing such costs are possible? Her light-based form flickered with confusion as she tried to understand human psychology. Katie looked at the alien student with sympathy. Every choice has a price. Sometimes paying a smaller price early prevents paying a much larger price later. We learned that lesson many times in our history. Her explanation only deepened the aliens' confusion about human thinking processes. The Academy administrators faced a difficult decision. Human methods achieved superior results, but violated every principle of civilized warfare that had kept galactic peace for millennia. Their approach treated war as something to be won rather than managed, controlled, or negotiated. Other alien students began requesting permission to study with the human team. They wanted to understand how Deathworlders could achieve impossible results through methods that seemed completely irrational. The humans found themselves teaching concepts that had no equivalent in alien languages or thinking. Jake gathered his team that evening to discuss their growing reputation among the Academy population. They had proven that their methods worked under controlled conditions, but real warfare might present different challenges. The attention they received felt both welcome and dangerous. The galaxy was about to learn that beings from dangerous worlds approached problems differently than species that had evolved in safety and comfort. Human methods reflected millions of years of surviving on a planet where everything tried to kill them, and quick decisions often meant the difference between life and death. Academy leadership decided the humans needed testing under extreme conditions that would expose their limitations. Commander Zithkar worked with his senior staff to design a scenario that would challenge even the most adaptable species in the galaxy. They created a multi-environment combat simulation that combined vacuum operations, toxic atmospheric conditions, and radiation levels that could kill most beings within hours. The exercise took place across 3 connected space installations. The first station operated in hard vacuum, with no atmosphere or gravity. The second facility maintained an atmosphere of corrosive gases that could dissolve standard equipment and protective gear. The third installation sat in a radiation field, strong enough to interfere with electronic systems and cause cellular damage to most life forms. Professor Korthik of the Hydros Civilization explained the scenario to all participating teams. Your mission requires securing objectives in all 3 environments within 12 hours. Most species will find at least one of these conditions impossible to operate ineffectively. We expect teams to focus on environments where their natural abilities provide advantages. The alien teams began extensive preparation immediately. Nexari students calculated radiation shielding requirements and equipment modifications needed for the toxic atmosphere station. Etherian teams worked on maintaining their energy-based forms in hard vacuum conditions. The Veltar collective mind struggled with the concept of operating where their shared thoughts might be disrupted by radiation interference. Equipment specialists provided each team with environmental suits designed for their species. The gear looked impressive with multiple backup systems, air recycling capabilities, and protection against various forms of environmental damage. Most alien teams spent hours learning to use the complex equipment properly. Alex Turner looked at the human team's assigned equipment and shook his head. This stuff is too complicated and too heavy. What happens if it breaks while we are inside? He examined the environmental suits with the skepticism of someone who had learned not to trust technology in dangerous situations. Jake Martinez agreed with Alex's assessment. We have been in dangerous places before without fancy equipment. Remember the survival training in the Australian desert and that winter exercise in Alaska? This is just more of the same, but in space. His casual attitude toward the deadly conditions shocked nearby alien students. The human team requested basic protective gear instead of the advanced environmental suits. They wanted simple breathing apparatus for the toxic atmosphere, basic radiation badges to monitor exposure, and standard magnetic boots for the vacuum station. Their equipment list looked primitive compared to what other teams carried. Katie Brooks spent time studying the layout of all 3 installations rather than focusing on environmental protection. The real challenge is not surviving in these places but completing the mission objectives efficiently. If we spend all our time worrying about the environment, we will run out of time. Her approach puzzled instructors who expected humans to be more concerned about the obvious dangers. When the exercise began, alien teams moved carefully from one station to another while monitoring their environmental systems constantly. They communicated frequently with their support teams and followed detailed safety protocols designed to prevent equipment failure or exposure to dangerous conditions. The Nexari team spent 40 minutes in the vacuum station, completing their first objective. Their advanced suits provided perfect protection, but limited mobility and required careful movement to avoid damage. They achieved their goal, but used significant time and energy in the process. The human team entered the same vacuum station and moved through it, like they had been born in space. Ryan Cole pushed off walls and used momentum to travel between sections faster than anyone thought possible. Lisa Grant operated equipment with her thick gloves as easily as if she wore no protection at all. Alex Turner completed the vacuum station objectives in 18 minutes. When asked how he moved so efficiently in zero gravity, he explained that it felt similar to swimming underwater back on Earth. The concept that humans might find space operations natural rather than challenging had never occurred to the Academy. Instructors: the toxic atmosphere station presented different challenges as corrosive gases ate through most materials within hours. Alien teams used sealed suits with independent air supplies and moved slowly to avoid accidents that could expose them to the dangerous environment. Jake Martinez led his team into the toxic station, wearing simple breathing masks and basic protective clothing. The acid gases that terrified other species reminded him of working near volcanic vents. During geology field trips on Earth, the temperature and pressure conditions felt similar to deep cave systems he had explored. Katie Brooks pointed out that the toxic gases actually provided advantages if used properly. The enemy would never expect us to move through areas where the air itself is a weapon. We can use the dangerous atmosphere to hide our approach and limit their movement options. Her tactical thinking turned environmental hazards into strategic assets. The human team completed the toxic station objectives in 15 minutes, while other teams were still testing their equipment seals. They moved through the corrosive environment like it was mildly unpleasant weather rather than a deadly threat to most life forms. Radiation station proved most challenging for alien species because the energy fields interfered with their advanced technology and threatened their biological systems. Most teams approached it as the final obstacle that would require all their remaining time and resources. Lisa Grant checked her basic radiation badge and shrugged. The levels are high, but not immediately dangerous if we work fast. This is like working near the reactor cores on Earth naval vessels. Stay alert, move quickly, and get the job done. Her casual attitude toward radiation that could kill most aliens within hours demonstrated the gap between human and alien environmental tolerances. Human team entered the radiation station and split up to cover more ground faster. Each member completed different objectives simultaneously rather than working together as a single unit. They ignored the radiation readings that would have sent alien teams into emergency evacuation procedures. Alex Turner finished his portion of the mission and returned to the safe zone with radiation exposure levels that would have required immediate medical treatment for most species. He felt slightly tired, but otherwise normal. The Academy medical staff could not believe his readings were accurate. Professor Cor Thack reviewed the exercise results with growing amazement. The humans had completed all objectives in less than 4 hours, while most alien teams were still working on their second environmental station. More importantly, they had treated deadly conditions as minor inconveniences rather than serious threats. The Deathworlders demonstrated capabilities that challenged basic assumptions about environmental limitations and survival requirements. They operated effectively in conditions that would incapacitate or kill most galactic species without appearing to suffer significant stress or performance degradation. Commander Zeth Carr requested detailed analysis of human physiology and psychological responses to environmental stress. The results showed that beings from Class 9 Deathworld had evolved survival capabilities that far exceeded anything seen in civilized galactic species. Ryan Cole explained human attitudes toward dangerous environments to curious alien students. On Earth, everything tries to kill you all the time. Weather, animals, diseases, natural disasters, and even the plants can be deadly. We learn to work in dangerous conditions because staying safe often means not doing anything important. The Academy medical staff discovered that human stress responses actually improved their performance under pressure rather than degrading it. Where most species became cautious and slow when faced with environmental threats, humans became more focused and efficient. Katie Brooks demonstrated this principle during a follow-up exercise where teams had to complete precision tasks while exposed to various stress factors. Alien performance degraded as expected when conditions became more challenging, but human performance actually improved. The gap between Deathworlder capabilities and galactic norms had implications that extended far beyond academic exercises. If humans could operate effectively in environments that crippled other species, they possessed strategic advantages that could reshape military thinking across the galaxy. Lisa Grant summarized the situation during a discussion with alien classmates. You all evolved on safe worlds where survival meant avoiding risks and making careful decisions. We evolved on a world where survival meant taking risks and making fast decisions. Different environments create different capabilities. The Academy faced a fundamental question about the nature of military training and combat effectiveness. Were they preparing students for theoretical conflicts between civilized species? Or should they adapt their methods to account for beings who approached warfare from a completely different perspective? Word of the human performance at Kepler Academy reached the highest levels of galactic command within days. Fleet Admiral Taijin decided to observe the Deathworlders personally and brought with her classified military scenarios based on real threats facing the galaxy. Her arrival caused excitement and nervousness among students and faculty alike. The Admiral came from the ancient Zalthran species that had maintained galactic peace for over 3,000 years. Her people were known for strategic thinking that spanned centuries and military doctrine that emphasized stability over quick victory. She had never encountered beings who approached warfare from a completely different philosophical foundation. Admiral Taixing brought reports about the Devourers, a machine intelligence that had consumed 3-star systems, using warfare algorithms that perfectly countered every conventional strategy. Previous battles against these machines resulted in devastating losses because they could predict and counter every move made by galactic forces. The Devourer machines processed information faster than any biological mind and made decisions based on pure logical analysis. They studied opponent tactics, identified optimal countermeasures, and implemented perfect responses that eliminated waste and maximized effectiveness. Fighting them was like playing chess against a computer that could see 50 moves ahead. Jake Martinez reviewed the battle reports from previous encounters with the Devourers. The machines had faced attacks from the best military minds in 12 different species and defeated them all using methods that demonstrated complete understanding of galactic military doctrine. Every conventional approach had been tried and failed. Alex Turner noticed something that the alien observers had missed. They fight like perfect versions of your people. No waste, no mistakes, optimal solutions for every situation. They are so logical that they have become predictable. His observation made Admiral Taijin lean forward with interest. Katie Brooks studied the machine response patterns and began to smile in a way that made nearby aliens uncomfortable. They expect opponents to make rational decisions based on complete information. What happens when we make irrational decisions based on incomplete information? Her question challenged assumptions that had guided military thinking for millennia. The Admiral authorized a full-scale simulation using actual Devourer algorithms captured from previous battles. The scenario would pit human tactics against machine intelligence that had proven unbeatable when facing conventional galactic forces. The stakes were higher than any previous Academy exercise. Ryan Cole proposed a strategy that horrified the alien observers. Instead of establishing logical defensive positions and supply lines, he suggested deliberately placing forces in locations that offered no strategic advantage. Make them waste processing power trying to understand why we chose obviously bad positions. Lisa Grant expanded on Ryan's concept by recommending attacks against targets that provided no military value. Hit their least important installations first, while ignoring their command centers and weapon systems. Force them to defend everything instead of concentrating on protecting critical assets. The human approach violated every principle of efficient warfare that had been developed over thousands of years of galactic conflict. They proposed deliberate inefficiency, tactical irrationality, and strategic choices that made no logical sense. According to established military theory, Admiral Taishin authorized the simulation, despite protests from Academy instructors who believed the human methods would result in catastrophic failure. The Devourer algorithms had never lost a strategic engagement and showed no weaknesses when facing logical opponents. The simulation began with Devourer forces deploying according to optimal strategic doctrine. They established overlapping fields of fire, positioned units to maximize mutual support, and prepared responses for every conventional attack pattern that galactic forces had ever attempted. Jake Martinez implemented the human strategy immediately. His forces attacked unimportant Devourer outposts while avoiding obvious military targets. The machines responded by reinforcing attacked positions and preparing for follow-up assaults that never came. Devourer algorithms began consuming massive processing power trying to identify the logical framework behind human actions. They analyzed attack patterns, calculated strategic objectives, and prepared countermeasures for anticipated human moves that defied mathematical prediction. Katie Brooks exploited machine confusion by launching simultaneous attacks on 17 different locations that had no apparent connection to each other. The Devourers tried to identify the strategic pattern, linking these targets while preparing responses for the obvious follow-up attacks. No follow-up attacks came. Instead, Alex Turner began a completely different operation in a sector that had no relationship to any previous human activity. The machines diverted resources to counter this new threat, while still trying to understand the purpose of Katie's seemingly random attacks. The Devourer algorithms began experiencing something they had never encountered before: analysis paralysis. They kept trying to find logical explanations for illogical human behavior while burning computational resources on calculations that led nowhere. Ryan Cole noticed the machine confusion and pressed the advantage by making decisions that contradicted his own previous actions. He attacked positions he had previously ignored while abandoning advantages he had fought to secure. The pattern made no sense to logical analysis. Lisa Grant implemented the killing stroke by launching her main assault against the one Devourer position that offered her forces no tactical advantage whatsoever. The machines had prepared for attacks against logical targets while leaving their most defensible position lightly guarded because no rational opponent would assault it. The simulation ended with Devourer forces in complete disarray despite maintaining superior numbers and firepower. Their logical thinking had become a vulnerability when facing opponents who operated outside the boundaries of rational strategic planning. Admiral Taishin stared at the results display in shock. The machines that had defeated every galactic military force had been overwhelmed by tactics that made no logical sense according to established military doctrine. The humans had won by being unpredictable rather than efficient. Professor Quintal of the Nexari struggled to understand how deliberate irrationality could produce superior results. Your species makes decisions without complete information and chooses suboptimal tactics deliberately. How do you achieve victory through methods that should guarantee defeat? Jake Martinez tried to explain human decision-making to the confused alien audience. Logic works great when your opponent thinks the same way you do. When they don't share your assumptions about rational behavior, logic becomes a weakness they can exploit. The Academy computer systems began analyzing human tactical patterns and failed to identify consistent logical frameworks. Every time the analysis algorithms thought they understood human behavior, the Deathworlders would make decisions that contradicted the predicted patterns. Admiral Taishin realized that 12,000 years of galactic military development had created a fundamental vulnerability. Civilized species had optimized warfare to the point where it had become predictable to any intelligence capable of logical analysis. Katie Brooks summarized the situation during her debrief with Academy leadership. You all fight wars like you are trying to solve math problems. There is always a right answer and a wrong answer. We fight wars like we are trying to survive in a storm. Sometimes the wrong answer is the only one that works. The implications extended far beyond academic. Exercises. If the Devourers or similar threats faced the galaxy in the future, conventional military responses would fail because they operated within predictable logical frameworks that advanced intelligences could counter. Ryan Cole made an observation that changed everything. The machines beat you because they think faster and better than you do. They can't beat us because we don't think the same way they do. Sometimes being unpredictable is more important than being smart. Admiral Tyshan filed her report with recommendations that would reshape galactic military doctrine. The age of purely logical warfare was ending, replaced by something that incorporated controlled chaos and beneficial unpredictability. The Academy, prepared to train a new generation of officers who understood that perfect efficiency could become a fatal weakness when facing opponents who approached conflict from completely different perspectives. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the best strategy was having no strategy at all. The Galactic Defense Academy underwent massive changes following Admiral Tyshan's recommendations. Traditional warfare courses now included sections on controlled chaos, adaptive improvisation, and the strategic value of unpredictable decision making. The library added entire sections dedicated to human historical conflicts and Deathworld survival psychology. Commander Zethkar found himself restructuring curriculum that had remained unchanged for centuries. Faculty members struggled to understand teaching methods that deliberately encouraged students to make irrational choices under specific circumstances. The concept challenged everything they believed about proper military education. Ryan Cole became an unofficial instructor, helping alien students learn to think beyond optimal solutions. His first lesson involved a simple question that broke the logical frameworks most species relied upon. What happens when your best option is deliberately choosing the worst option? The question created cognitive dissonance among students who had never considered such possibilities. The Etherian student, Luxara, approached human thinking like a fascinating puzzle that might be impossible to solve. Her species had spent 50,000 years eliminating emotional decision-making in favor of pure logical analysis. Learning to trust intuition and gut instinct required rewiring thought processes that had evolved over millennia. Katie Brooks worked with alien students who struggled to understand concepts, like playing hunches and making snap decisions without complete information. She used simple examples from Earth survival situations where overthinking led to death, while quick instinctive responses saved lives. Imagine you are walking through a forest and something moves in the corner of your vision, Katie explained, to a group of fascinated aliens. Do you stop to analyze what it might be, or do you move away immediately? On Earth, the ones who analyzed usually got eaten by predators. The Nexari student Prextall found human decision-making processes completely alien to his computational mindset. Your species makes choices based on incomplete data and emotional responses. How do you achieve positive outcomes using methods that mathematical analysis shows should fail? Lisa Grant tried to help him understand by demonstrating pattern recognition that operated below conscious thought. "Watch my hands," she said while throwing objects for him to catch. You are calculating trajectory, velocity, and impact timing without thinking about the math. Your body knows things your mind has not figured out yet. The Academy implemented the Deathworld Protocol, a new strategic framework that incorporated controlled unpredictability into conventional tactics. Alien species began training their officers to think like predators rather than philosophers. Though the transition proved difficult for beings evolved in safe environments, Alex Turner established training exercises that deliberately placed students in situations where logical analysis would fail. Stop trying to find the right answer. He told frustrated alien cadets. Start looking for any answer that might work. Perfect solutions that take too long to find are worse than imperfect solutions you can implement immediately. The final examination combined everything learned throughout the program. Academy administrators designed an impossible scenario that would test both conventional military knowledge and new concepts about adaptive warfare. Students faced defending a colony world against overwhelming odds with minimal resources and no possibility of reinforcement. The scenario parameters made traditional success impossible through mathematical analysis. Enemy forces outnumbered defenders by 8-1 and possessed superior technology across all categories. Previous examinations using similar setups had focused on minimizing casualties and preserving infrastructure while achieving partial objectives. Martinez looked at the tactical display and immediately recognized the fundamental problem. They expect us to fight a defensive war against superior forces. That is a losing strategy no matter how well we execute it. His team gathered around the holographic battle map to discuss alternatives. Traditional alien approaches focused on establishing strong defensive positions, creating layered fallback lines, and using superior defensive positioning to offset numerical disadvantages. Every alien team began implementing variations of the same basic strategy that had been proven effective for centuries. Katie Brooks proposed something that violated every principle of civilized warfare. What if we don't defend the colony yet? Oh? What if we evacuate everyone and turn the planet itself into a weapon against the invaders? Her suggestion horrified alien observers, who had never considered such extreme measures. The human strategy involved complete abandonment of fixed defensive positions in favor of mobile warfare that treated the entire planet as a battlefield. Ryan Cole coordinated evacuation of the civilian population while preparing infrastructure for destruction rather than defense. Lisa Grant established hidden supply caches and weapon systems throughout the planetary wilderness, while Alex Turner organized guerrilla forces that would operate behind enemy lines after the initial invasion succeeded. Their plan assumed initial defeat and prepared for long-term resistance operations. The alien teams implemented careful defensive strategies that followed established military doctrine. They created interlocking fields of fire, prepared fallback positions, and established communication networks that would allow coordinated response to enemy advances. When the simulation began, enemy forces landed and encountered exactly the resistance they expected from conventional galactic military forces. Alien defensive positions provided determined resistance that followed predictable patterns and could be countered through superior numbers and firepower. The human approach produced completely different results. Enemy forces found empty cities, booby-trapped with explosives and environmental hazards. Infrastructure that should have supported their advance had been sabotaged or destroyed before they could secure it. Jake Martinez implemented scorched earth tactics that turned every captured territory into a liability rather than an asset. Enemy forces controlled ground that provided no strategic value while facing constant harassment from hidden human forces that appeared and disappeared without warning. The evacuated civilian population became an intelligence network that provided real-time information about enemy movements while staying completely invisible to invasion forces. Katie Brooks had transformed millions of refugees into assets that enemy commanders never considered as military threats. Ryan Cole's guerrilla forces struck at supply lines, communication systems, and isolated enemy units using tactics that conventional military doctrine had no effective countermeasures for. Every enemy's success created new vulnerabilities that human forces exploited ruthlessly. The simulation reached a turning point when enemy commanders realized they controlled a planet that had become actively hostile to their presence. Every resource they captured required more resources to defend. Every position they secured became a target for attacks they could not predict or prevent. Lisa. Grant launched the counteroffensive from positions that enemy forces had never considered defensible. Her assault troops emerged from wilderness areas, abandoned cities, and underground tunnel systems that invasion planners had dismissed as strategically irrelevant. Alex. Turner coordinated simultaneous attacks on dozens of targets that forced enemy forces to spread their superior numbers across defensive positions they had never planned to establish. The invasion army found itself besieged on a planet they had supposedly conquered. The simulation ended with enemy forces in full retreat. Despite maintaining overwhelming advantages in numbers, technology, and firepower, human tactics had transformed a hopeless defensive scenario into a decisive victory through methods that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Admiral Taijin observed the results with a mixture of admiration and concern. The humans had achieved impossible objectives by treating war as something to be won at any cost, rather than managed according to acceptable parameters. Their success came through deliberate abandonment of limitations that kept galactic conflicts civilized. The alien students completed their examinations using conventional methods that achieved partial success within acceptable casualty parameters. They followed proper military doctrine and made rational decisions that produced predictable results. Their performance met all traditional standards for military competence. The gap between human and alien approaches to warfare had implications that extended far beyond academic exercises. Deathworld tactics achieved superior results, but required psychological frameworks that most galactic species found disturbing or incomprehensible. Professor Viloth filed his final report on human military psychology with recommendations that would influence galactic policy for decades. The Deathworlders do not fight to minimize casualties or preserve resources. They fight to achieve victory regardless of cost. Against enemies who share our civilized limitations, this represents an overwhelming advantage. Jake Martinez addressed the graduating class during the final ceremony. We learned as much from you as you learned from us. Your people fight wars like they want to solve problems. Our people fight wars like they want to survive. Both approaches have value depending on what kind of war you are fighting. The Academy graduated its first integrated class with new understanding of warfare.